Hello everyone, welcome to Audiobookish. This is an audiobook review and discussion podcast. My name is Vahed Rahman and I'm joined by Poppy Knight.
Hello.
And today we are doing kind of a New Year's festive special. We are going to be discussing The Hogfather by Terry Pratchett. Do you want to read the blurb about the book, Poppy?
Yes, so. 'Twas the night before Hogswatch, and all through the house something was missing. The stockings are hanging ready, the sherry and pies are waiting by the fireplace, but where's the jolly fat man with his sack? It's not right to find death creeping down chimneys and trying to say ho ho ho, but someone's got to bring the little kiddies their presents, or else they might stop believing. Belief is important in Discworld, particularly on the last night of the year when the time is turning. If the real man in the red suit isn't found by morning, there won't be a morning, ever again. A festive feast of darkness, jolly robins and tinsel. As they say, you'd better watch out.
And the author is Terry Pratchett. He was the acclaimed creator of the global best-selling Discworld series, the first of which, The Colour of Magic, was published in 1983. In all, he was the author of over 50 best-selling books. His novels have been widely adopted for stage and screen, and he was the winner of multiple prizes, including the Carnegie Medal, as well as being awarded a knighthood for his services to literature. And he died in March 2015. And this version of the audiobook, So Penguin have decided to readapt all of Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels into kind of they're recording new versions of this. And this version of The Hogfather is read by BAFTA award-winning actor Sian Clifford, with BAFTA and Golden Globe award-winning actor Bill Nighy reading the footnotes, and with Peter Serafinowicz as the voice of Death. It also features a new theme tune composed by James Hannigan. So Poppy, this was your idea. So kind of tell us why you wanted to kind of discuss The Hogfather and particularly why this new version kind of appealed to you.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I know we were both really excited when we heard the announcement about all these books being redone. And then The Hogfather has a really particular special place in my heart because I knew it through the Sky adaptation, which my family watched at Christmas. It's sort of the main thing that introduced me to Terry Pratchett and Discworld. So a really important thing there. Plus, I just love the story anyway. And, I wouldn't rewatch it as often as I do if it weren't for that. I have read the book a couple years ago and watched it many times. I hadn't heard any audio adaptation. And then with this one coming up, I was really excited for what they were going to do with it, to talk to you about it. And I thought it'd be really good. So yeah, nabbed it and thought we could release a little festive special. And yeah, even though Hogswatch is sort of a parallel to Christmas, on kind of the official Discworld calendars and stuff that have had one of before, it's sort of at the end of December. It says that Hogswatch night is kind of the 31st, and then Hogswatch is on a mythical date that us in Round World don't get. Yeah. So I thought it would still be a really good time. Plus, like I was saying, I've watched the film a lot, but we often don't necessarily watch it before Christmas. Often this kind of middly time between Christmas and New Year where you still feel festive, but it's not the run up to Christmas, and it's that kind of middly time. I think it's a really good thing to have in that time, whether you're reading it, listening to it, watching it, whatever. It's a good story to keep you in that festive spirit. You can reflect on how the holidays have been, all sorts of stuff. It's just really good.
So we did previous review another Terry Pratchett book, which we weren't too hot on. Have you listened to any of the other Discworld audiobooks? I think they're usually read by Tony Robinson. I think that's his name.
I haven't actually, no. Partly because I have really, really beautiful hardback ones that are the Joe McLaurin cover designs. Which, I love and sort of collected from the start. I sent a little kind of fan message on Facebook to him just years ago saying how much I really loved the designs, because I think they're incredible designs, kind of line drawings. It's just magical. It's an amazing style and it looks so good on these books. And he was really touched by me having said that, and he asked me which one my favourite was, and then he sent me a copy of it.
Oh, that's lovely.
It's signed. I know. So that's amazing. So yes. So partly the reason why I've more gone physical printed word with the Terry Pratchetts is partly because I want to read those hardbacks, because I love them so much. And I also, I wasn't sure about the audio. I've heard mixed reviews, which obviously it does happen with everything, and certainly popular things. So I wasn't sure, and because a good amount of them are quite old, which doesn't necessarily mean they're bad, but, you know, audio has progressed so much since then, and kind of the effort and production power that's put into them as well.
Yeah. So I kind of got mixed feelings on the ones that I have listened to. I think the ones with Tony are fine. I don't think he especially elevates the material. I mean, he's got great comic timing. The one thing that does annoy me slightly is that he kind of gives some of the characters kind of Lancashire accents when, like, in my head,
what's wrong with the Lancashire accent?
Just in my head, kind of like the characters in Ankh-Morpork is kind of like an urban city, and like for me, they should sound like they're more from kind of like more an industrial kind of like sounding voice, like maybe like Manchester or Liverpool or something like that. And so that for me is just kind of that little bit of a disconnect. But let's talk about this version of Hogfather. So as soon as I pressed play, I just had a massive smile on my face. This is just like lovely and cozy and just kind of like just settling in. Most of the narration is done by Sian Clifford. I think her performance is, on the whole, amazing. She's got really a really beautiful voice, and she kind of narrates the action really, really well. So just kind of what were your first impressions when you kind of hit play?
The first thing hitting play is what you mentioned at the end of your description, is about the original music, which is really fantastic and just sets the atmosphere perfectly. And it's sort of got different sections with different moods in it playing. It's quite a long piece, but I think it's really, really good. It really puts you in the right zone. I sort of felt kind of a bit of a crossover with an earlier one, but if people have watched the BBC His Dark Materials, the opening credit theme to that, it has a similar sort of feel to that. I'd written down in my notes, it's sort of like that crossed with Star Wars, and then goes to like fairy and fun, and then a bit mischievous, and there's jingle bells all Christmassy, and then it goes really dramatic again. And like I'd let people off if they said it was too long. I could understand that, but I disagree, and I loved it. Different themes and emotions and facets that you feel throughout the book are sort of encapsulated in that theme, which I just thought was, incredible. And so then, Sian, I have written down here that I felt like she was a bit angry at the start. It sort of seemed more aggressive than I have it. Now, again, this is very much coming from the fact that I know this story from the Sky adaptation, which is very close to the book, so much so in like actual words a lot of the time. In this bit specifically, you do have a narrator that reads out this beginning part, and he has a very low, calm voice. And so that is just ingrained in my head. So that's perhaps why I didn't gel as well with this. But she seemed kind of angry and shouty about it, which I wasn't super sure about. And all of these criticisms throughout this whole episode, if I have any criticisms, it is all from a place of, this is a discussion podcast, it's an opinion thing. And I want to set out straight that I think it is incredible. So I hope if anyone who was at all involved in this does end up listening to this, please do not be offended by anything I criticize about. It is just kind of an opinion-y thing and seeing what you think and stuff like that. But and a bit like you were saying with accent, she was very RP in the narration, which is fair, and it is a fair enough decision, but it does feel quite different to what I think of. It's not saying I have a particular like regional accent or whatever, but that kind of posh harshness sort of jarred with me a little bit. But when she was being more kind of from Susan's perspective, I felt that worked really well. I felt she was sort of a Susan kind of narrator, which was kind of cool. And almost all of her character voices I absolutely loved. There were a couple I found a little bit grating and didn't really enjoy, but almost all of them I thought were fantastic. And I did think it was interesting how, I don't know if this is coincidence or research or whatever, but how some of them really did sound like the voices from the Sky adaptation.
Oh, that's interesting.
Some of them, some of them were super, super similar, but in a really nice way. I do think she did a fantastic job. Some things weren't read how I hear them in my head, but that's fair enough. And yeah, but definitely a lot of emotion and performance in there, and nice. And
I think it's one of those things, kind of like you have to kind of judge these things on their own kind of like merits, but it's really difficult to separate the different versions. Kind of like there's a Sky version, which means a lot to you. Then there's the book version, which you've got, you narrate in your own head in a particular voice. And then there's this interpretation of the text as well. It's interesting you say you found her voice a bit harsh. Maybe it's because I'm from London. I didn't really get that intonation from there, but I wouldn't necessarily use harsh narration.
Yeah, it was kind of, especially the angry part. It was sort of at the beginning talking about the different theories about how the world was created and stuff like that. And so I won't be able to do very good impressions, but kind of how I read it when I read the print book, but because I'm inspired by the Sky adaptation, is much looser, much lighter, and kind of like the line where it's like, and there's another theory that things just happen. What the hell?
Okay.
Kind of thing. People do a better performance than that. It's not a good performance, but that sort of tone. Whereas hers was like, it was more angry. It was more like this scholar who thinks that was like, and things just happen. What the hell?
Yeah.
Again, I'm not doing a great impression of it, but it was that sort of thing. There was more sort of, kind of anger, aggression-y, pacey sort of stuff to her narration, I felt, in certain places, at least.
Okay.
That, like I say, I think fits with Susan's kind of sharp character, but not kind of the casual, laid-back, jovial kind of, but with a little bit of cleverness and stuff that I hear when I'm normally reading a kind of Pratchett narration.
Yeah. So I think it would kind of behoove us to kind of mention the two other performances in at this stage before we kind of start breaking it down, the plot and the and the theme. So Bill Nighy is kind of, Bill Nighy kind of read it really. For me, just from like, I'd be interesting to hear what your point of view on this and production. It did occasionally sound like he's been recorded in a broom cupboard at certain points. I'm just wondering whether that's kind of like a thing where he's had to record this remotely and locked down or something, because his voice sounded very different to where like the other two narrators were kind of working from, if that makes sense.
Yes, I'm glad that you brought this up, because yes, I did think the same. And obviously I don't know, there could be a kind of directorial decision there of sort of, so he's reading the footnotes as he's being, Terry Pratchett, jotting these things down, and maybe that kind of idea of making it a different room. But yes, I got the same impression as you, in that to me, it sounded like he was recorded in a different space and that it was muffled. And also the fact that this announcement came about all these books and then suddenly the Hogfather was coming out. And I don't know, but you don't know if, with the time-sensitive nature of this particular story, you don't know how rushed the production will have been on this. I don't know. They could have had it in the pipeline for ages. It could have been sorted, and this could be a complete decision to have him be more muffled. But my educated guess, is that yes, I don't know if that was planned for him to be quite such a different kind of sound quality in there. And it's certainly, I didn't love it, but yes, can certainly forgive it if that is the reasons why, and even if it was a decision, can understand that. But yes, it was a little jarring, the fact that his voice quality was just so different, the sound quality, wasn't it?
I think it was, it doesn't detract too much, but it's just kind of like, it was like just a little bit like jarring. Kind of the rest of it's kind of like the same. I don't want to say smooth, because his performance, he's got a lovely voice and stuff like that. It's just kind of, you can just kind of tell there's a different anyway.
And I thought it was odd, because I didn't know how I would feel about the fact that someone else was doing the footnotes, because kind of when I read them in the print, I still think of them as the voice of the narrator, you know what I mean? So I didn't know how I would feel about it being someone else, because then I'm like, oh, so is it not that same perspective that's telling me the story or whatever? But I actually really liked it. I surprised myself. I kind of went into it thinking, I'm not sure if I will like this, though obviously, thinking Bill Nighy would do a great job, but not knowing if I would like that separation. And actually I really quite did. I think my only criticism on that was that I really loved that there was a little kind of musical twinkly sting to indicate that, you know. How do you translate footnotes into audiobooks? That's
so
going to be one of the most
difficult.
difficult things.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So I thought they marked that really well, and I think choosing a different voice is a really good idea for marking that as well. I sort of felt like the transitions though took a little bit long. Like, this is very, very picky criticism, but I sort of felt like you needed dingle dingle, footnote, dingle dingle, you're back kind of thing. Whereas it seemed to be sort of dingle dingle dingle, pause, footnote, dingle dingle, pause, and you're back. You know, there was a little bit of me that was just a little, like a second less time would just, but this is ridiculously picky, but it just came out to me.
Yeah, I think
is what I thought.
Kind of maybe that's kind of like them filtering into kind of like Bill Nighy's kind of like speed of talking.
Maybe, yeah.
As well. And I think Peter as Death was really, really good.
Yes.
I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, it made me jump. When he first came into it, I was because I was listening to this just like lay on my bed in the dark or whatever, and sort of lay down, and then suddenly there was this deep low voice, and that made me jump a lot. But yeah, fantastic. Again, it's very odd that you get such a predominance of one voice and then a little bit of a completely different voice in audio. You know, you either have like dual narration that's pretty evenly split, or at least you know why it's split, where it's split and stuff like that, or you have full cast, or you just have one person. It's very odd to have everything of the narration and almost all of the character voices in one voice, and then have one character's voice by someone else. It's sort of, and so I was concerned, will this work? And it really does. Apart from that initial shock where I think just the volume of his booming voice when I wasn't expecting it made me jump. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, really good.
I think, I mean, just to build on that point a little bit, I think you need to kind of see this, because this was, when was this released? Kind of like 9th of December or something like that. So just as you mentioned. So is this the first of the new audiobooks that's coming out? It must be. So I think with regards to having the different actors playing kind of different roles, I think we're going to have to see this as part of an overarching series.
Yeah, definitely.
And in terms of, because there's going to have to be that continuity throughout all the different adaptations, and I think that's one thing that I had in kind of like the back of my head. But I think Peter hit it out of the park. As Death, and Bill Nighy. It's like Bill Nighy just does the Bill Nighy thing, so it's just kind of it's fine, it's good, it's really nice. So kind of Terry Pratchett's got this recurring theme where he goes back to kind of belief and the nature of belief. It's kind of it's part of a lot of his books, especially I think the first 2 or 3 that I read, belief played a really big part of it. I'm speaking specifically of small gods, pyramids, and like even the first book that I read, Guards, kind of like belief in dragons. So it's a recurring motif that he kind of returns to time and time again. I think this, the Hogfather kind of explicitly makes clear what his views on belief are more clearly perhaps than any of his previous works. I was just wondering what you kind of felt about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many quotable parts that people do quote a lot of the time about this, and certainly kind of Death's speech near the end to Susan.
It's an iconic speech.
Yeah, for sure. About how humans need to believe and why we need magic and why we need stories and things like that, which, anyone who listens to this podcast, I love meta stuff. And it is this. It's talking about, well, why are fantasy books, worthwhile, and why are they worthwhile for adults and everything? And it's because we do need to believe things, and there's sorts of ideas of what's true and what's not, what's real and what's not. And it's very much that just because you can say that logically something is real or not real isn't the same as believing in it, and there is a real difference there. And about these things of what makes us, conscious beings and sociable beings, and just, everything like that.
There's kind of, especially, it's kind of quite interesting, the difference between Death and Susan in terms of like the little lies that the little things that we ignore that aren't really there, and then kind of there's these other things that we kind of create to make life a little bit smoother and fairer. I think that was kind of quite interesting to me, and it's kind of so I mean, especially Death's speech kind of at the end is that's, I think, is about as cinematic as Pratchett's gotten in his writing.
Yeah, I really love how he also talks about belief and stories entwined with that throughout the ages.
Yes.
Kind of stuff. So this idea that the gods have evolved because we believe different things about them, they fill a different purpose and stuff like that. And the stories of the hidden people from Iceland and stuff, the little elves, that I have a really beautiful little book that my sister got me that has an introduction in that really succinctly puts about how these stories came from needing to explain things like why children were going missing and why people were dying in the harsh temperatures and all sorts of stuff like that. And you find that with fairy tales across the world. That's always where fairy tales and stories come from. It's those kinds of explainings of things like that. And then you have like this sort of animal sacrifice is how the sun comes up kind of thing. And then even when we're talking about scientifically right or wrong, even if you go, okay, that's not that, there's another sort of belief that takes its place. There's another kind of story that evolves into. And I thought that was really fascinating, looking at that, how humanity has evolved and changed and how things like belief and stories parallel with that, which I just think is fascinating. Yeah, anyone into folklore and anything like that is a really interesting book to listen to or to read, to get those sorts of ideas flowing around as to how humanity's story and folklore and belief and everything works. Really good.
I think we should probably talk a little bit about the plot to kind of just put this into a little bit of context. So essentially there's this assassin. His name is Mr. Teotime. I think I pronounced that correctly. Please don't come.
Teotime. That's how he says,
Teotime, who's been engaged by, I think we call them the auditors of the universe, to basically kill the Hogfather. And their motivations are kind of explained throughout the book, but it's kind of like Death, deciding to take on the Hogfather's role to perform this function, to build up this well of belief in this character. And then Susan trying to, it almost works as a bit of a mystery from Susan's point of view, because she's not entirely sure what's going on. And, her grandfather's not telling her much. And, she's it's kind of like that scene from The Godfather, where she said, when I think I'm out, they pull me back in. She thinks she's living a nice human life, and then this event happens, and she has to kind of go on this adventure to find out what exactly is occurring. So that's kind of what the background of the plot is. And another kind of theme that emerges as a part of that is the nature of families and how kind of you try and push away from the things that you don't want to be a part of. And then those things also bind you together as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think there's an important thing to note here is how this is part of the Discworld series, and it does very much obviously pull on lightly a lot of other things across different books. So sort of what you're saying about family there, the kind of idea that Susan is the granddaughter of Death, the Grim Reaper, who is a massive character throughout many, many, many of the books. This personification of death, and kind of not the same as, but you can think of it similarly if you've listened to this, of like Death and the Book Thief, written from that perspective. I know that was a big book for doing that. That's what Terry has. He has this Grim Reaper personification of death who looks at humanity sort of from the outside, but also with some kind of vested interest in there. And you have things like the Assassin's Guild, which is referenced in other books. You have the Unseen University of a load of wizards, referenced in all the books. And I think what's really good about it is that even though it does have these connections, it really doesn't need you to know any of that.
Yeah.
This was the first one that I came to, and watching it. So they take out a lot of the detail of stuff, explaining Susan's lineage and stuff like that. They don't really have time for, even in the 3-hour film. But it doesn't need you to know any of that stuff. You do pick it all up. And it is predominantly a kind of a Christmas time story. Hogswatch is sort of the Discworld equivalent of Christmas. You have the Hogfather is the equivalent of Father Christmas. And so you have that kind of thing, as well as just being a fun fantasy story anyway, as well as being an assassin story. all sorts of things like that. It is a brilliant story in itself, even though it has all those ties to other things.
I mean, it's kind of, you mentioned it's a detective story, it's a assassin story. It's also kind of like a heist story as well. There's kind of elements of like Die Hard in there too.
The ultimate Christmas movie, of course.
The ultimate Christmas movie.
Controversial.
So it's got all these different elements in there, and it's like, the other thing is like, it is kind of really funny as well, kind of like Ted. I think there's a couple of bits. There's kind of quite a lot of butt humor in here. There's one scene in particular where the wizards discover a bathroom, and it's kind of not so subtly implied that anyway, some water goes somewhere that it shouldn't, and so I kind of quite enjoyed that as well.
It flips between really serious and really silly, doesn't it?
And there's the thing I really like about Terry Pratchett's writing is that there's the full gamut of like different humors in there. There's kind of this kind of like really silly stuff in there, kind of like there's butt jokes, but there's also puns, and there's also kind of running gags, and there's also things that kind of have, you know, a long setup and payoff at the end, and intellectual stuff and all this sort of things. There's kind of like there's something for everyone in there as well. So let's talk a little bit about Mr. Tea Time. You mentioned you're kind of a big fan of the TV version of the show. I think I preferred Sian's performance as Tea Time as opposed to the TV version. I was just wondering what your thoughts on that were.
I will strongly disagree. I absolutely love Mark Warren's performance in the Sky adaptation for Titama. I think he did absolutely amazingly because he has a very, very sinister, light voice that he puts on. I think he's a great actor anyway. I love him in Hustle. Danny Blue, my cat, who is currently hidden under my covers because he decided to get himself underneath there and has not moved, so he's now just a lump in my bed, is named after Mark Warren's character in Hustle. But I think he does so good in this. It's a light, kind of childlike, really, really creepy voice that he has when he does it, that's sort of innocent with an edge. And it just is so amazing that I just love it. And I think it has that thing about his character where he thinks everything is a game. You know, he's already, before he gets contracted to do this, already thought of ways to inhume the Hogfather, because that's just how his mind works. He just wants to know, how would you do it? How would you kill the Hogfather? How would you kill Death? How would you kill the Soul-Caked Duck? He goes on all these lists of how would you do, but it's all just a game to him, and he's a fascinating, obviously quite evil, but fascinating, amazing character. And I thought that the Mark Warren performance and voice really does that, because there's something really, really sinister about him, and sort of, I don't know the right word for it. Whereas I felt Sian's was more just kind of a posh boy. And he kind of seemed too, lots of inverted quotes here, but too ordinary. Rather than this, you know, kind of thing that puts the top assassins on edge. This guy, you know, he's and the harshest, you know, toughest thieves in the Thieves Guild, he really puts them on edge, and he's sinister and sort of a childlike innocence, but also that childlike maliciousness. You know, I think that's the way to think of it. It's sort of mentioned before about kind of a cruelty to animals kind of thing, and I think that's the thing that is in sort of a lot of other things where there's kind of psychopaths and stuff like that in fiction, in real life as well, is that kind of that things start from that kind of, do they burn an ant with a magnifying glass kind of thing. I'm obviously not approving of any of that. This is very much in the realm of fiction where I love him, not in the real world. But it's that kind of thing. He's still just that fascination of, what would happen if I do this? Would they die? Maybe. Oh, well. Just that fascination with how things can be destroyed without thinking about the consequences and the human side of it or anything like that. That, yes, I think his softer, more sinister performance is better than this, kind of just posh voice.
Yeah, so the reason why I think I preferred this version, this performance is that for me, the danger from the TV character was always clear. I could see that this person was a dangerous character. And with this version, the thing that scared me is that I don't think I would have noticed the danger I would have been in as a character in the book until it was too late. And that is what I found more scary.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
And I think we both think the same thing about the two voices. Yeah. We just kind of read the character differently, because I think that's sort of right, that you should know that he's someone to fear. The way I read it is that he's always that. But I can totally appreciate why you think that sort of hidden sinister is better. And kind of as a comparison to that, going back to his Dark Materials, I think Mrs. Coulter should seem more innocent until you realise she's evil. Whereas I felt kind of in the TV one of that, even though I think it's an amazing performance, the nastiness is a bit more obvious.
Yeah.
The way that they've taken that than, say, the book or the audio adaptation that we listened to, or the film version, the Nicole Kidman one. Yeah. And so, I think it's that kind of distinction. Whereas, I think you should always know, in my mind, that he is evil and scary and stuff, is kind of how I think of it.
I mean, just kind of add another example to kind of those, the performance, kind of Littlefinger from Game of Thrones. Like, the way that I read Littlefinger is that the reason why he's such a dangerous character is that no one thinks he's the danger.
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of like that, that sort of thing. If I've got one criticism of Tea Time, the character, and I'm not trying to cancel Terry Pratchett, I'm really not. Okay, it's just, we have to kind of separate these things out, is that, this trope of having a bad guy with a physical deformity.
Completely agree. Yeah,
it's just kind of like, it's a shame that, that had to be part of the character. I think the character could have done without it. I do understand, like, there is a bit at the end where he's basically got a glass eye, and there's a bit at the end that kind of justifies why he's got a glass eye, sort of thing, in terms of one of the presents that the children receive. But I wish that kind of like hadn't been in there. I don't think it's, strictly speaking, necessary.
Yes, no, I completely agree with you. And it is, unfortunately, a very common trope that a lot of people think, oh yeah, well, it's fine. It's just, that's how it's a villain thing. But it's the fact that people translate that into the real world. Yeah. And people think that people with disfigurements and things like that are evil or bad, or they stare at them, or they're scared of them, and it's just not okay. It does have real ramifications. Yeah. So yes, I agree with you. I'm disappointed about that. And there were a few comments throughout that, not in any way to the same extent as we talked about with Carpet People, but that did disappoint me, that those comments were in there and that I didn't love them and whatever. And that as a large one. And I definitely agree with you.
I'm just specifically with the eye things. Like, one of my, so I wouldn't even say he was a friend. There's a boy that my primary school, his dad, they were refugees, and his dad didn't have an eye there at all. And he was just a lovely, smiling bloke that would come up and pick up his kids. So it's just, it's a shame that, that was there, really. Yeah.
No, completely agree. It is something that needs to be changed, and that people need to realize that, because the main thing that you hear is people go, oh, it's just a story. And it's, people need to realize that actually it's not. And that they need to kind of think about, going through your everyday life, think about, why do you think a certain thing is scary? Why do you think that? Well, it's because of the TV and film that you've watched, and if you don't, it's a bit like, that you've had, because someone in real life that goes completely against those stereotypes. But if people don't meet people like that, then they are just being formed by TV and film and books. And if all people get are those negative stereotypes, that's all they're going to think. So it's about people, rejigging and realizing that fiction is not just fiction, and that tropes like that are quite dangerous.
Which kind of brings me up kind of neatly to kind of the next theme of the book, which is fear. I think fear plays quite a large role in the book. I think, especially the later stages. I think the later stages of the book borrows quite heavily from Stephen King's It in some ways. Kind of, this group of burglars, criminals have kind of headed into the Two Fairies lair, and the Two Fairies lair is kind of fighting back by producing images and creatures that these criminals find kind of scary. And I really enjoyed that section of the book.
Yeah, no, same. Definitely. And it kind of links to what I was saying about that, like, childlike villainy. It's a childlike evilness. It's directly commented on in the book that just because something's for kids doesn't mean it's nice and friendly and happy. Because actually, kids' nightmares are often a lot scarier than adults' nightmares and things like that, because, you know, we kind of have more maybe kind of logic and understanding of the world of what's scary and what's not. And that even though children can be innocent in some ways, they can also have, you know, really horrible thoughts and things, either, you know, of themselves, kind of Teotihuacan stuff, or, you know, scary nightmares. And that exploring that childhood isn't all, you know, kind of happy, colourful kind of stuff is really interesting part of it. That manifestation of nightmare coming in is one of the big parts of it.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you kind of want to talk about specifically before I ask you a question?
Yeah, so sort of going a little bit more on the Teotihuacan stuff. I don't have a solution to this, okay?
Yeah.
But I didn't love how the narration always said tea time.
Okay, yeah.
Because so it's a major part of the book that his name is spelled Teatime.
Yeah.
And that people say tea time, and he gets really annoyed by that because he pronounces it Teotihuacan. And yeah, when I was reading it in print, I was always trying, despite the fact that it looks like tea time, to always sort of pronounce it more in that way when I'm reading it in my head, rather than like tea time. And I was a bit disappointed that that wasn't the case. And it's sort of, this is maybe reading it a little bit too deep, but I know he's the villain. I get that. But names are so important. Names are just such a big thing, and someone's name, their identity, and if, you know, taking the time to pronounce someone's name as it's meant to be pronounced is really important, and actively not pronouncing it in that way, like Susan does. Susan actively provokes him by saying tea time, is such a big provoking kind of act.
Yeah.
It is actively aggressive against
It's
them.
kind of a dick move, really, isn't it?
So while I completely understand that in this book he is the villain, and so maybe we shouldn't care if his name's disrespected, but I just think, that how important names are, it always felt really wrong to me that the narrator was pronouncing the character's name wrong and actively going against them. Now, it's difficult because his name is said before in the narration, before he says how it's pronounced. And obviously this was originally written in print so that you could see the spelling.
Yeah.
So I don't have a firm solution, because you couldn't exactly just go, oh, and Teotihuacan from the start, and that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And then could you say tea time, and then once he corrects it, could you then after that have the narration say it that way? I don't know. I don't have a solution, and that annoys me. But it was just something that really stood out. It really disappointed me because it just felt aggressive.
Yeah, that did stand out to me as well a little bit. But kind of the thing that kind of did occur to me is, oh God, what's the name of that TV show? Keeping Up Appearances. Have you ever seen that?
No, I don't know it.
Okay, so there's a family in there whose name is Bucket.
Right.
But the matriarch of the family is this. She's aspiring to higher things, so she pronounces her name Bouquet.
I feel like that rings a bell. Yeah.
So in my head, that's what Teotihuacan was doing. Was he's maybe trying to.
Okay.
Maybe his name is actually pronounced Tea Time.
Tea Time,
but he's just, due to the nature of the character, that's he's trying to put on like airs and graces that he doesn't deserve. Or maybe that is how his name's supposed to be pronounced, and it's an artistic decision that.
Oh, that's really. I genuinely, with all the time that I've been with this story, I hadn't considered that as a thing. But yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So
tracks.
Cool. Yeah. So is there anything else you kind of want to discuss?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, I could talk about it forever. I'm sure there's loads of things. Oh, sort of a little bit audio-wise, is apart from the footnote transition, this doesn't have any sound effects, which is obviously a clear decision for that. But the fact that it does have the footnote one sort of opens up the possibility a little bit. And I'm definitely not saying that I think it should be a sound design kind of book. I don't think it would be right to have a load of sounds throughout it. You could, but I don't think you need to. The ones, though, that disappointed me, particularly because of how close they could have been to the footnotesy ones, is that sort of the glingle, glingle, glingle for when
oh, yes.
a being is created. I really thought that could have had an actual glingle, glingle.
Yeah.
Again, really picky stuff, and anyone who is involved in that decision-making, please do not be offended whatsoever. It's just the kind of thought that pops into my head. Again, because I've watched the Sky one, where there is a little glingle, glingle noise, and the characters also say, did you hear a little glingle, glingle noise? You know, that I do think that on its own would have, without any other sound effect needed, I think that on its own would have really knocked it up another notch, I reckon.
It's so tricky kind of when you're designing a book like this, what to include and what not to include. And I think maybe there was that issue of like the time pressure as well. And we've been talking for about 40 minutes and we haven't even touched on how lovely I think the relationship between Death and Susan is and how kind of that evolves. It's a family reunion story as well in a lot of ways. So, and kind of how I really like the way that Albert's voice and the Crow's voice to me sounded quite similar in their intonation and kind of how I thought that's quite clever artistic decision to kind of like, because those two characters had kind of a similar role in both Death and Susan's life, how they would kind of like sound quite similar to each other and stuff. But the question I wanted to ask you is, can you explain the ending to me in terms of like, so there's a chase at the end, kind of like, what does that mean?
Yeah, okay. I also, on endings though, this is a really funny, because despite how well I know this, it's a sort of book where you feel like the ending is there and then there's more.
Yes.
And then you think, oh, and this is where it ends. Oh, no, wait, there's another bit. Oh, this is where, wait, no, there's one more bit. So yeah, and not in a bad way, but in a really weird way where sometimes I don't know that I'm very picky when it comes to endings. Yeah. It's something that it is difficult for me to like. So like Guards, I love. I think the ending is rubbish. You know, and I don't know that endings always work in sort of, and Terry's ones, I don't know if I always like them. But these ones I actually do like. And I think it's weird because I think he just has like 3 or 4 really good endings in one book. But yeah, so which specific ending?
The specific one. The Hogfather. Can you just explain to me what you think happens in that chase sequence? Kind of what is supposed to happen and what do you think the auditors are seeking to... I don't understand what the Hog was supposed to be doing, if that makes sense. Was it just supposed to get away? Is that kind of the thing that was supposed to happen?
Well... Now this is very kind of theoretically writing an essay about it rather than definitely saying an answer kind of thing. And skip forward if you don't want spoilies. But sort of with the way you phrased it, what's thinking in my head is that the idea is that Susan, a human or at least mostly human, protects the Hogfather and what the Hogfather stands for from the auditors. I feel like that's maybe the key thing, rather than just he was meant to get away. And I think sort of because it's very much shown that he is losing in that race. You know, he's not going to get away if someone doesn't intervene. And so the auditors are trying to get rid of the Hogfather because they're trying to get rid of belief and imagination and this kind of idea that they like the universe as a bunch of rocks spinning around in space, or discs or whatever, rather than, you know, life and imagination and all that good stuff. So they're trying to get rid of the Hogfather, who stands for that kind of belief and joy and happiness and suspension of disbelief sort of thing.
Yeah.
And Susan steps in and gets them to go away. Saves the Hogfather, who had gone back to a sort of original form as a boar who would have been a blood sacrifice for the sun to come up, and it's like we were talking about before of how those stories changed. The
entire thing, I was really, it might help if I knew a little bit more about kind of the myth that it was based on, and that kind of that entire sequence kind of confused me as to, well, how does this idea of mercy and the sun rising kind of, I didn't really, it was all a bit disconnected in my head.
I think a main thing about it is like hope for tomorrow. I think. So connected to that idea of, you know, if we sacrifice this boar to the gods, the sun will come up, we will have a tomorrow. It will be brighter kind of thing. You can sort of see how that tracks to the Hogfather coming in the night and bringing gifts and the tomorrow being better,
Yeah.
and also just that anticipation and hope in the night before, which is what you have with that sacrifice.
Is a big theme in the book as well, actually, kind of why rich kids kind of get the presents and like the poorer kids, and Death is very upset about that as well. So, so maybe that is the point that I didn't kind of get. And this is a book I have read and I have watched the TV show, and even after listening to the audiobook, I was still a little bit confused about that. So so maybe that that is what the kind of like the answer is there. But it'll be interesting to hear what other people think about that as well.
Yeah. So I think it's that. I think it's humans defending those beliefs that they have, and whether that be kind of that really old historical one, how they had to believe that they had some agency over the sun coming up and that kind of thing, and believing that they could make this happen, things would happen, there would be tomorrows. And then as that sort of evolves, you have it becomes potentially might seem more trivial, and that's sort of one of the things that Death talks about in his speech. It kind of seems true, you believe in a jolly fat man that brings presents, but it's that idea of that things will brighten up, that things will get better, things will go in the future, and those kind of stories. And it's sort of a moment, I think, of the human intervening and protecting that part of life. And then even though he sort of in his hog form like dies, but him as a god hasn't died. It says as an animal sacrifice, he's died so many times, you never know. But then he's come back to this form that he was.
Yeah, I think it would have been really helpful. I don't know if there is like a Discworld version of like what the Hogfather myth actually is. Maybe that will help clear up some of my confusion.
I mean, there's so many companion things and stuff like that. I even got a new one for Christmas just the other day. But which I think will have some more stuff in that. There's a one about the gods. I think it's part of the Science of Discworld series, but it's like the gods one. I have a lot of them that I've just not yet read, so I bet there's some stuff in there that's and pretty good.
Probably some Discworld fans listening to this at the moment
that are shaking their heads. I know they call themselves Terry Pratchett fans. Yeah, I know. I just think one thing I wanted to add on is sort of it's connecting with that belief stuff. Is that one of the main mechanisms of the story and the plot and how it works is this idea about there being a finite amount of belief and what is done with belief and how it's controlled. So the whole stuff with the Tooth Fairy's castle is about controlling belief, and basically the way to kill the Hogfather is to stop people believing in him, which we've heard in lots of things and kind of like fairies and stuff like that, is that the way to kill a god is to stop them believing in American gods as well, as another one that uses that. So that's kind of the idea there. But it's sort of talked about that they're stopped believing in him, but they're not necessarily believing in anything else. And that then leaves, in the magical, wonderful world that is the Discworld, all this belief floating around with nowhere to go. And so the little things that people don't really believe suddenly become real. So one of my absolute favourite ones is that when you do your washing, and one of your socks goes missing, you've no idea where it is, something must have eaten it, And that's a phrase that I know we've used in my house, that something must have eaten it. Genuinely probably before we watched The Hogfather. Because it's just, someone must have eaten it, because it's gone. There's no way of finding it, And you don't really believe that, but you also kind of do, because there's no other explanation, And it's in that moment where things like the eater of socks, that belief kind of concentrates itself, and suddenly there actually is an eater of socks where there wasn't before, even though there are things like the personification of death and the Hogfather and stuff that are real in Discworld. Those things weren't real, but then they become real. And it's just amazing. And you have like the cheerful fairy. People joke about, when you're low and you need a cheerful fairy. And incredible character that I think really, it really touched home a little bit this time when I was listening to it, because the cheerful fairy can't cheer anyone up because everyone's just really miserable at the moment and she's really sad about it, and I was like, wow, that's poignant at the moment listening to that. But I think it's really fascinating. His observational humor is one of the things that Terry does really well, and by putting that mechanism in there, he's able to do that so well in this book of what are some of the things that could explain natural phenomena that we could make into funny little characters in this story.
One of the major characters in the book is the god of hangovers, which is it's not the god of hangovers, the god of hangovers, which is just quite funny.
And that pun was like, oh god,
and again, kind of it almost there's that, you know, kind of like one thing references another, you know, slightly in there. Kind of almost reminds me of that scene from the Ghostbusters, was just like, you know, don't imagine,
don't think about it.
I just imagine the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. It's just kind of like one of those things.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, that's
it's so good. And connected to that as well, one of the best characters in it is the thinking machine Hex.
Yes.
Which is just wonderful. So it's sort of, because Discworld is kind of, certainly in this bit where this story takes place, it's kind of you got a steampunky kind of thing to it. They don't have technology of like computers and stuff like we have, but they do have magic, and sort of it's that idea of magic replaces technology and what does that make kind of thing. Of the thinking machine Hex, who also has a mouse wheel as one of its parts, and you need to feed the mouse, otherwise Hex won't work. And
there's
the FTB, there's a bee here. The FTB needs to be enabled, the fluffy teddy bear, and things like that, which I just love. And Hex's belief, you know, much like death, the kind of idea of this whole thing is about inanimate objects / things that don't exist having a human kind of conscious form and a humanity to them when you wouldn't necessarily think, as well as amazing puns like anthill inside and stuff like that.
Like there's so much we haven't really discussed Susan's character art.
So much.
But there's some, let's just get to our recommendations. I can't recommend this highly enough. I think it's a brilliant adaptation, and if the rest of the Penguin series are anything of similar quality of this, we're in for a real treat. I think it's going to be a really special next couple of years as these books come out. So if you're a Discworld fan, I can't recommend this highly enough. I think it's a brilliant adaptation. And if you're an audiobook fan, I think this is, you know, really, really great performances, really interesting design choices as well. So I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, completely agree. And just quickly on that to clarify, like, it's an adaptation as in it's been put into the audio format, but this is unabridged and everything, you know, it is very much kind of what the text is but read out. So which is really good. And yes, I think if you know the story already by reading it, watching it, I do think you should listen. I think maybe you might think, oh, you know, I know that differently, that's not how I would have done it. But that's okay. you know, it's okay to listen to something and to think that while you're listening to it. And I do think it's fantastic. And I think it's something where, you know, you want to reread it at this time of year, but you're really busy. You know, I'm always very much for concentrate on it, treat it like it is a physical book. But also if you do want to be doing other things, you know, if you're driving a long way to meet up with people, you know, over this time or whatever, have an audiobook on, you can get through it quicker potentially listening to it, and I think this is a really good way to do it. I do think they're fantastic performances. I think if you're interested in audio, like you say, in that terms of what kind of decisions would you make, it's an interesting just study anyway based on that, of, you know, exploring it. It is really, really entertaining. It is fabulous. It does give you the story, whether you're a fan already or not. I think it's just an amazing story. I think for people who aren't Pratchett fans, either they haven't really tried it or they've tried some and don't really like it. They do exist, believe it or not. I think this one is really, really good because it is a holiday story. It has so many parallels to our life. It's just a great story in itself. Even though there are connections, it is fabulous on its own. It sounds great. I love it. You should definitely listen.
God, I haven't even really talked about Corporal Nobby Knobs. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So, please, you know, give this a try if you haven't listened to or read any Discworld books before. You know, like Poppy said, you don't really need to understand the full mythos to kind of enjoy this one. So thanks for listening, guys. I think both of us want to wish everyone a really peaceful and successful and lovely 2022. I think 2021 and the year before that were both quite difficult years for everyone. So let's let's hope the next year is going to be a lot more pleasant. We wish you peace and happiness and health and all that stuff. And thank you again for listening and supporting the podcast. You can find us on social media at audiobookishpod. And if you want to email us, you can email at audiobookishpod @gmail.com. Any closing words, Poppy?
No, I think if I start, I will just go on another tirade about things that we don't have time to talk about.
Yeah.
So no, go listen to it, then go watch it, then go read it. Just all of it. All of it.
Okay. Thanks, guys. See you later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.